Hey everyone, I'm the Canadian lad, and today I watched Moon Knight episode 3 at 0.2 epic speed and found some amazing new details. Now this is gonna be a complete breakdown plus my 0.2 epic speed series, so I will go scene by scene and try to explain everything. And if there's an Easter egg or a hidden detail that I found along the way, I'll talk about it too. So without wasting any time, let's begin. The episode opens with the camera trying to focus on Layla, almost giving us an impression as if we just woke up, and now seeing a different perspective, only to realize this is actually director Mohammed Diab playing with the camera to show us Layla getting her pictures taken for a fake passport. Now her fake passport reveals a few information about her. Her full name is Layla Abdullah Al-Fawli. Now if you're familiar with Arab culture, you'll know that the name Abdullah is a very common name there, which means servant of God, and her date of birth says she was born on October 28, 1994. Although these credentials might also be fake, but I think her name and the date of birth are at least real. But there's a tiny bit of issue here. Notice the issuing date of her fake passport is 29th of May 2021 on the physical copy. But while this lady was photoshopping her fake passport, the computer screen showed it as 2019, meaning she must have changed it before hitting the print button, which might indicate Layla was in fact never snapped. Or maybe Marvel fixed it in the post, as they don't want to reveal way too much about Layla now. Now we learn from this scene that Layla is actually a Robin Hood type character who steals the already stolen items and returns them where they belong.
Take them off the black market and return them to their rightful owners.
Layla Al-Fawli is based on the comics character Marlene. Introduced in 1976 as Marvel's Spotlight number 28, she is basically Moon Knight's long-term love interest. In the comics, Marlene is the daughter of a noted archaeologist. After discovering the lost tomb of Khonshu, her father was attacked and killed by mercenaries seeking to raid the dig site. Marlene, who was working with her father on the expedition, found Mark Spector and was with him ever since. And as we learn in this episode, Layla is also the daughter of an archaeologist and spent plenty of time at his dig sites as a kid. While she doesn't go into details, it's clear that something bad happened to her father.
Whatever happened in that desert is lost to the sands.
So if we put everything together, both Layla and Marlene are daughters of an archaeologist, and they're both Mark Spector's on and off partner. So it's safe to say that Layla is the MCU's version of Marlene. Cut to the desert where we see Arthur Harrow guiding his followers to the tomb of Ahmed. Now I can't help but think how this scene resembles the way Moses guided his followers in the desert. Well, according to the Holy Scriptures. Now the scarab that Arthur Harrow is holding is actually floating in the air. And notice the shadow on the sand. The VFX department made sure to CGI the floating scarab on the shadow as well. Then we see Mark Spector running after some knife fighting thugs. But there's a very interesting bit of action here. Notice how Oscar Isaac gets rid of his hat while running at full speed. Now in the comics, Mark Spector has another alter identity by the name Jake Lockley, a very smart cab driver who wears a similar sort of hat. So my theory is Jake Lockley must have instigated this fight, but in the middle of his sprint, Mark Spector took over. And I love that Mark didn't let this guy complete his showboating and just outright punched him in the face. I don't think I can thank Mohammed Diab enough for this scene. I mean, I've seen so many action movies where villains would pull off a move like this and the hero would just stand and watch, so I'm glad it didn't happen this time. Now one more detail from this scene, notice how Mark Spector, despite being a mercenary, still showed mercy towards this kid. He chose to slap him instead of throwing a punch. So Mark isn't exactly the opposite of Stephen Grant. He does have humanity in him to some extent. However, it's Jake Lockley who seems to be the most brutal among the three. More about this in a minute. Cut to a taxi where Stephen is now in control of the body. Or that's what we're made to believe. So from our perspective, Mark Spector was in the middle of fighting, and then Stephen Grant took over, ended the fight, and got on a taxi. But I don't think that's exactly what happened there. I think it's a deliberate misdirect from Mohammed Diab, teasing us about Jake Lockley. Because if Stephen had taken the taxi to go to the airport, he would still remain Stephen even after coming back to his senses. Stephen wouldn't just take a taxi and then give the body back to Mark. So what I'm trying to say is Mark was fighting over here. Then he had this blackout. But then when he came back to his senses, he was still Mark Spector. This means Stephen Grant never took control. It was Jake, aka the third personality, who took the taxi in the first place. Plus, another consistent detail I noticed throughout all 3 episodes is that the transition between Mark and Stephen is very smooth and seamless.
Alright, go ahead, you're in. Cheers, thanks a lot.
They can literally switch places mid-conversation or mid-fight. But whenever a third personality intervenes, Mark or Steven suffers a mini seizure. This has been happening since episode 1, so it's safe to say all 3 personalities have been there since the very start. Now I love how this taxi driver was asking for his money, which might be a nod to this famous Moon Knight meme where he asks Dracula, "Where's my goddamn money?" Then we see Mark chasing down one of the knife men. But notice just before this guy got caught, he knocked over some rolled up carpets to slow down Mark. And there we get this massive blunder from Marvel. somehow the camera crew showed up on screen, or they just forgot to edit them out due to a bigger aspect ratio. But you know what, given how good this series has been, I'm gonna forgive them as an audience. I'll give you some leeway here, Marvel. Or this could all be intentional, as Stephen Grant in the comics believed he's in a TV show called Moon Knight. Mark then suffers another blackout and finds himself surrounded by 2 dead bodies. And as I said already, whenever he has a blackout or a seizure, it's Jake Lockley taking control of the body. That's why when Mark asks Stephen,
Steven, what did you do? I swear it wasn't me.
so this basically confirms my theory that every time Mark and Steven switch places, it's pretty seamless and smooth. But when it comes to Jake, the body suffers a mini seizure. And notice how Steven calls Khonshu a pigeon.
I suggest you stop listening to that stupid pigeon.
While Khonshu later calls Steven a worm.
I summon the gods, you summon the worm.
I guess they're even now in it. Anyway, Khonshu then causes an actual solar eclipse just to grab the attention of the other gods. Khonshu even explains the extreme consequence he would have to face before doing it.
To signal for an audience with the gods is to risk their wrath.
What? Well, what's the worst that could happen?
Anger them enough, and they'll imprison me in stone.
This line from Khonshu was actually foreshadowing his own fate, where the other gods decide to imprison him in stones. Not only that, notice what he says to Mark here.
See how you fare against Harrow without the protection of my healing armor.
This dialogue over here also foreshadows the fate of Mark Spector, who loses all of his Moon Knight powers and healing abilities by the end of this episode. So now he would have to fight using his own human skills to rescue Khonshu. I love it when writers write scenes like this. It goes to show that not one dialogue is just for the sake of filling content. Every bit of words spoken by each character ends up revealing a bigger picture at the end. Now just before the meeting of Anya takes place, Khonshu starts walking away, leaving Mark behind. But notice what Mark says here after seeing this.
Aren't you coming with?
Oh, I'll be there.
So instead of saying, "Aren't you coming with me?" he only asks, "Aren't you coming with?" This is another clever piece of writing, because Mark suffers from dissociative identity disorder, or DID, and he knows it. That's why he doesn't say "come with me," because he's not sure who he will be in a few minutes. Now notice another amazing visual detail here. Whenever Khonshu is nearby Mark, he casts a shadow which is only visible on Mark's body. His shadow doesn't appear on the ground or any nearby surface. But notice when Khonshu started walking away, this giant shadow of Khonshu also moved away from Mark. I went back to episode 1 and 2 to make sure of this detail, and I found it to be true and consistent. So this has to be one of the best hidden details in this series so far. Now in this trial of Arthur Harrow, we meet avatars of Horus, Isis, Tefnut, Osiris, and Hathor. Aside from their obvious real-life inspiration, each of these gods already exists in the Marvel Comics. Now the most prominent avatar among all of them in this episode was Yetzil, avatar to Hathor. This might be Marvel planting the seeds for a future villain though. I'm not saying Yetzil is a villain, but a future avatar of Hathor might be. Let me explain. In the comics, Hathor or Hathor Sekhmet takes a feline appearance and is a sibling of Wakanda's panther god Bast. Now Hathor Sekhmet eventually takes on the mantle of lion god in Wakanda, becoming an enemy of Black Panther. T'Challa even mentioned Sekhmet by name in Captain America Civil War.
You reach out with both hands and Bast and Sekhmet. They lead you into the green veldt where you can run forever.
So if Marvel decides to do anything more with this character, they can now easily do it in Black Panther 2. Now while Harrow enters this court, notice there were plenty of stone statues just like the one of Khonshu at the end, meaning the gods have previously imprisoned a lot of others in stone. Now we learn on this court that the gods have basically decided to avoid meddling with humankind because humans pretty much stopped worshipping them. Although the reasons are a bit different, but they are like Eternals up to some degree, and that's where Khonshu differs. He asks the other gods to start taking actions, but no matter how much he said, the other gods just didn't buy it and left Harrow unpunished. I mean, I don't blame them. Khonshu didn't have any concrete evidence to prove his point. And if he had asked the other gods to look in the desert, but they would find the followers of Harrow digging Amit's tomb, I'm pretty sure Harrow already had that taken care of before he appeared in this court. And if you think about it, Khonshu was essentially asking the gods to punish Harrow for a crime he didn't commit yet. So in a sense, Khonshu was going against his own values here, and that's why he lost. But thank goodness Yetzil is there, who gives a massive lead to Mark, hopefully toward Amit's tomb. She tells Mark that there's only one man who had the exact location of Amit's tomb, aka Sanfu. So if Mark finds Sanfu's sarcophagus, he would also find the map to Amit's tomb. And she also tells him that Sanfu's sarcophagus was sold in the black market. So that's where Mark would have to go to find it. Now before I jump to the next scene, can I just take a few to admire Oscar Isaac's brilliant acting here? I mean, my guy acted his heart out in the scene. Switching between Mark and Khonshu, you could see it was taking a physical toll on Mark's body, and Oscar acted it perfectly. And when he admitted that yes, he does need help as he's going through some mental issues, Oscar really made sure to give his all in this scene.
Are you unwell?
I'm unwell. I need help. But that doesn't change the fact that this man
Tell us if you feel exploited by Khonshu.
This is not about my feelings! I'm not the one on trial here! He is!
So hats off to Oscar Isaac, and I'll even go as far as saying he's currently Marvel's best actor along with Jonathan Majors and Mahershala Ali. We then see Mark Spector searching for sand food, but notice somehow his hat has worked its way back to where it was. The last time we saw him wearing this, he was running on the rooftop and left it behind, but it's surprisingly with him again, so it's feasible that Jake Lockley actually assumed control off-screen before this street sequence, then reverted back to Mark ahead of the boat ride. The reason I'm focusing so much on the hat is because the third personality, aka Jake, always wears a hat in the comics, enters Layla, who then takes Mark to Anton Mogard's place. Now if Moon Knight is Marvel's Batman, Anton Mogard is Marvel's Joker. The writers even tease it during this scene.
So what, this Joker just puts on normal mock games in his backyard for fun?
In the comics, Anton Mogard is a thief who only steals the finest jewels and pieces of art, and he always strikes at midnight, therefore the name Midnight Man, and the name fits with his all-black outfit as well. Now here's a very interesting detail. When Khonshu appears on the top of a clock and tells Mark that his time is ticking, notice the time is exactly 12 AM, a reference to Anton Mogard's alter ego Midnight Man. My prayers are with the late Gaspard who played Anton Mogard, and it really breaks my heart that we won't see him again. He's gone way too soon. Enters Harrow, who then interrupts the conversation and talks about how Layla's father was murdered. Notice how Mark immediately looks at Layla as soon as Harrow starts talking about it.
You keep thinking that distance will prevent the wounds from your father's murder from reopening, but something stands in your way.
Now my theory is Mark Spector was the one who killed Layla's father, or at least had something to do with it. Or perhaps it was Jake Lockley who killed Layla's father, but the blood is still on Mark's hand. Now Mark didn't share any of this with Layla, as he fears Layla would hate him for that. Harrow then destroys the sarcophagus of Sanfu, and that's when a massive fight takes place, and Mark finally summons the suit in this episode. Now there are a bunch of hidden details during this fight that you'll easily miss if you don't slow down the playback. For example, when Mark was using his cape as a shield to protect Layla from the bullets, notice the bullets were getting stuck on his cape, almost as if his suit is storing them so he can unleash them later, which he eventually does by whipping his cape, sending all his bullets back to where they came from. And I think it's a very easy to miss detail, because I've seen a lot of people think this was Moon Knight throwing sharp blades at the guards. But when you watch the scene slowly, you'll notice those are actually the same bullets. And I love how Moon Knight summons his crescent blades mid-battle, kinda like Thor when he summons his hammer. Now a lot of us really wanted this series to be R-rated, and Marvel is really pushing the boundaries. I mean, take a look at how Moon Knight literally breaks one of the guard's arms and another one's leg. That too without even looking. That is some badass move right there. Mark then loses control of the body to Steven, who then tries to defuse the situation by talking, but that obviously backfires. I love how 1 second he was like, give me the body, Mark, and the next moment he was like,
So just like chill the F out. Take the body. Take the body, Mark.
Oscar Isaac's comic timing is equally brilliant. You notice Steven was stabbed twice with 2 huge pulls on his body, but when Mark took over in his Moon Knight suit, there was only 1 pull pierced through his body, implying Mark Spector is so strong with the suit that him taking control immediately broke off one of the pulls. Just take a look at how 3 of Anton's guards have literally pinned Mark into the ground, as they can't cope with Mark's enhanced strength, and still it only took Moon Knight 2 seconds to break free. Cut to the final phase of this episode, where Mark gives control to Steven, and I laughed my ass off watching the exchange between Mark and Steven. Just like I said, their transition is very seamless and smooth. Anyway, Khonshu then changes the night sky by turning back time to 2000 years ago. Khonshu says he remembers every night, especially that night when Amit was vanished and hidden in the desert. Now keep in mind, this is Khonshu's 2nd time meddling with the sky in the same episode. So as a result, the court summons again, and punishes Khonshu by turning him into a stone. Now I'm glad Marvel mentioned how the stars would be contingent on time of day, and that the stars have shifted since the map was created, so Khonshu had to do what he did. I love it when sci-fi movies or shows try their best to remain close to real-life physics, and this light show of the night sky looked incredibly stunning. Now I'm curious what Doctor Strange might be thinking seeing this chaos all over the sky. Now as they succeed in turning back the night sky, all of Khonshu's powers leave Steven's body as well, but notice the last thing Khonshu said to Steven.
Stephen, when the gods imprison me, tell Mark to free me.
So by the end of this episode, even Khonshu believed in Steven, who would now have to pass this message to Mark. And that's how this episode ends. Now one thing I noticed after watching all 3 of the episodes, Steven seems to be the man Mark wants to become. Intelligent, soft-spoken, nerdy and kind. He calls his mother every day, and even shares the same interest with his wife. He's the kind of man that is worthy of Layla's love. Think of it this way, your father really wants you to become a good soccer player, but you suck at it. And deep inside you keep telling yourself, I wish my father had another son who was great at playing soccer. And as your dissociative identity disorder kicks in, you become that version of yourself, and now all of a sudden play amazing soccer. But if Steven represents what Mark wants to be, Jake represents what he's afraid he truly is: violent and dangerous. For instance, Mark was trying to interrogate these guys, but Jake just outright murdered them. I think Jake is gonna be really scary, as he represents the even darker side of Mark Spector. Now, one last detail from this episode would be from the credits, where the moon is slowly getting fuller by each episode. And that's it. This would be my breakdown of Moon Knight episode 3 at 0.25 big speed. I know my breakdowns come a bit late, but when I make these videos, I spend days thinking and finding hidden details that you won't find anywhere else. So if you think the wait is worth it, please give me a thumbs up, grab the subscribe button, and turn notifications on. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter to get updates about my videos. Till then, I'll see you lads in the next one.